It's finally time. I've got a bunch of footage from my old Quantum 4-front power chair. I've been sitting on the footage for over a year. Everything in this video was filmed last year sometime. I don't know the exact date, and I'm not going to elaborate on exactly when it was, simply because I've had interesting dealings with
insert company name
and their lawyers. Anyways, I basically take apart my chair, show some of the design issue problems and, in my opinion, the carelessness that it was assembled with and the absolute disregard for anyone's safety. You're gonna hear a recurring theme in this video. In my opinion. Enough time has passed and I'm going to share my story. That's what this is. We're taking apart my old Quantum 4-front, I'm sharing my experience, and I'm showing the facts and the things that I see with my own eyes and my thoughts and comments about it. This is in no way applied to any products they currently sell or sell in the future. This was the chair I had and the problems I found with it. And problems being defined as my engineering and my knowledge and my background and the things that I think were wrong. Okay, so all that out of the way, this video is going to be split into two parts. I started taking the chair apart and I was astounded by some of the stuff I found, so I just grabbed my cell phone and started filming. As I got further into it, I realized, okay, this is interesting. Then I grabbed this big camera and filmed the other side of the chair. So we're gonna start off with one side of the chair, then halfway through the video we're gonna switch to the other side. Part of it was filmed with my old cell phone, part of it was filmed with this camera. Some of the things I say are gonna be repeated, but just for cohesiveness of watching the video, I tried editing it together and mixing the clips and it got super confusing. So we're just gonna do two distinct halves of this. This is not acceptable, in my opinion. Just watch, you'll see what I'm talking about. I would not be proud to say half the things that Quantum says they're proud of. Enjoy. Welcome back to the floor. So today I've decided screw it, and I'm gonna give the metaphorical middle finger to Quantum and the DME, who told me if I touch this chair, they're not gonna work on it. I don't care, it's my chair. They told me that it's my chair when I tried to return it. They're like, no, we can't do that. It belongs to you. We can't return things that belong to people. So if they don't wanna work on it after this, well, I had a brief conversation with my lawyer and well, if they're gonna refuse to work on it, I'm gonna get a lot of money. So we're gonna take this thing apart and I'm gonna show you what's wrong with it. Now I've already fixed the other side. Well, fixed. There's a number of issues here that come down to the components they're using, how it was put together, some of their design decisions. A few years ago, Quantum bought them out. And that's where all these new versions of their chairs, said that weird, new versions? That's where all the new versions of these chairs came from. They bought another company and they're adapting their own stuff like seating and whatnot onto them to make them into Quantums. And that explains a lot of things. There's a lot of really weird decisions and it kind of looks like part of it is well engineered, but then there's other things it's like, what are we doing here? So it makes sense. They took a platform that was designed well and they're using bubble gum and super glue to put their parts on it that they've already designed because they don't want to spend the money, in my opinion, to redesign the stuff they already have to fit with a platform that they just bought. Anyways, this suspension system was designed by Fox Racing. That's who designed these shocks, that's where they came from, and that's why they're $600 a piece. But they're in a transition period right now. Their entire product line is going to have the suspension soon, which is good. I like the suspension. There's a few things which I'll show you here in a minute that they did a little bit weird, but the ride quality is very premium, and that's a good thing. So, knowing what I know about the other side of this, we're gonna go through this step by step, and I'm gonna show you the few little things that really don't even require any modification. And there's a few clips that I took with my cell phone from the other side that I'll probably put in here, but yeah, at this point, I'm gonna take it apart and fix it. I'm done screwing around. Okay, so right off the bat here, one of the big issues we've been having with this thing is, well, it's sitting up on a block right now, so it's not moving too much, but how much slack we have when the chair is stopped. And not only that, there's a very specific metallic noise coming from this region, which is where the parking brake is housed. Listen. Now, there's a difference between clunking and actually metal slapping. The result of this metal slapping noise we're hearing is loose parts. So if you just rattle the wheel a little bit, here there's sort of a high-pitched, like tink, tink, tink sound. Yeah, there's things that are very loose in here. What we're gonna do here first off, I'm gonna pop the wheels off this thing. And it was kind of interesting yesterday when they were replacing the motors on this. They said there was some bolts that were very stripped out and they were having trouble getting them off. Did they replace those bolts? No. Did they put those same damaged bolts back on? Yes. Now, that was the DME. That was INCLINE doing the work yesterday. So, there's that. This lug nut feels like it's cross-threaded. Are you serious? Yeah, they cross-threaded this. There's metal shavings in here. Yeah, cool. Well, one more thing to add to the list. Brand new motors and hubs, already hosed. Well, I guess like I always say, the cross thread's a strong thread. Now, I'm going to have an interesting attitude throughout all this, and it sounds like I'm really giving them a hard time, and I'm not gonna lie, I am. I'm frustrated, and I've gotten to the point where it's like, I don't even care anymore. So, the overtone of this video is gonna be somewhat condescending. I'm gonna try to curb it as much as possible, but as we can see when we get in here, there's some inexcusable things. Now, I understand that people may not be educated or they're new at their jobs or there's rookie mistakes, that's one thing. But when you're building a $35,000 piece of equipment like this and you're kicking out, I don't know how many they build a day, 10, 20, 30 of them, I don't even know. They claim they've got this assembly line that's just going full steam ahead and they're really proud of their manufacturing process. But when you start getting strip bolts and all this other stuff, there's things that just aren't excusable. So just fair warning for this, I'm not going to be ridiculously nice about the things I'm going to show you. This is how bolts that aren't cross-threaded should come off, just by hand, really easily. Okay, wheel removed. So the way these things are set up, this whole motor assembly from here forward, it mounts on this little pivot bar and the whole thing like rotates up and down and this shock mount holds it in place. Got a couple of Phillips screws here that the fender pops off with. So I'll just run these out of here real quick. How's the framing on that? You can probably point this up a little bit. There we go. Block off our exposure. And then this wire sort of goes through this little maze of weirdness and I just need more slack because I don't want to disconnect these lights. So you just pretty much grip it and rip it. That comes out and then we can shove it up here. Now there's one little nice touch here. There's some little foam things that go on the back of that fender that keep it from rattling. So I will be pointing out little things like this that are nice, that were done, you know, properly and actually had some thought behind them. First up, what we're gonna do is remove these two Allen bolts here. And these hold on the whole like assembly that the motor attaches to. Now on the other side, this front bolt was really stripped out. I don't know if that's the one they're referring to, but on this side, it's actually not. So, all good there. Most of these like anodized bolts and things like that, when they're attached to various kinds of metal, they sort of stick in place. So when you first go to take them out, you just give your wrench a good hit and they'll pop them loose. And that's what that snapping noise is. It kind of sounds like braking, but it's usually not. And they did use Loctite on these, so that's good. Don't want these coming off. And this here is just a little lightweight piece of like, I don't know, some sort of metal. It's not magnesium, but it's something super lightweight. Now we're gonna take off this little cap up here that holds the suspension pins in place. Just two little Allen screws here. And all throughout this, I'm probably gonna be substituting clips that I took with my phone from the other side, because there may be some things that I saw over there that we're not gonna see over here. And then there's another little clip right here. There's one screw holding it on. Here you can see this part. It's got a little ledge there, and that holds in the pin that holds the suspension on in the front. So now, if we lift up on this, I should be able to pull this pin out. And then, to watch this wire here, and now our motor assembly. There we go. That'll drop down to the floor. And then, kind of a strange design decision. There's sort of a threaded pin in here that holds this top shock in, but it's free floating in there. And on this piece that goes on here, they just have this bump of metal that goes in there to kind of hold it in place, but the whole thing kind of rattles around. And if you notice, there are no wear marks on this at all, which means that's not even touching this, which means that when this shock moves, it's going to rattle around in there, and that pin is going to slide back and forth and make a bunch of noise and wear things out and all that good stuff. So to get that out, is it threaded the same as this? Maybe I can thread this in there and then pull it out that way. Ah, it is. Okay. So I just threaded a screw in there, and now we should be able to, there we go. We can pull that pin out just using that screw. So here's our front shock, $600, fancy. Depending on how much slack they left in here, which in this case is not much, we should be able to slide this whole thing off the shaft. Watching our fender light wire there, this should just slide off of here. There we go. And here's our motor front suspension assembly thing. So when they replaced the motors on this yesterday, they removed these 4 bolts right here. And these thread all the way through, and there's not a lot of slack in this cable. The other side had literally like over a foot of slack. So you can see we've got the 2 bolts here. These go all the way through and have the nuts on the other side. And then there's 2 pins here that are welded in, and then there's nuts on the other side of those. And what I discovered on the other side was this bolt down here was internally broken. So we've only got 3 of them connecting it on, which is okay. We're only dealing with rotational force here. That's the only thing these are holding. But the other ones were all loose. So we're gonna check these and make sure. Okay, wow, these ones are actually tight. Cool. And then there's a Allen bolt over here we have to hold. Check this one. Yep, that's loose. Got over half a turn out of that. Let's check this one. Quarter turn. Okay, so we got about a half a turn out of that one too. Let's check this one down here. Okay, that one's tight. I only got maybe a 1/16 of a turn on that one, but that one's pretty good. Okay, so if those are loose, the motor can sort of rotate a little bit independently of this bracket. And yeah, no bueno. So another thing we're going to check straight away here, on the other one, we have these bolts here. There's 2, and then 2 on the other side. And these, I got a turn and a half out of each one. Now these are responsible for the camber on the chair and holding everything in place. And also, I'll insert the clip, the top of the bolt here, you could see was not inside the countersunk hole that's designed for it. So let's check these. Are these ones stripped out too? Yes. seriously. Yeah, look at this. Yeah, it's a little dark in here to see, but these are all stripped out. Let me grab a metric equivalent here and see if that'll fit it a little bit better. Or no, standard equivalent, that was metric. Okay, those fit in there a little bit better. Okay, so these ones are reasonably tight. Got a little bit out of it. Let's check the other side. Now we're switching back to the metric wrench here because these ones don't seem to be stripped out. Okay, got a little turn out of that one. But it's now properly seated. Check the other one here. A little bit of a turn out of that. Now we're going to move on to the back of the motor here where the brake housing is. This is where I found most of the problems having to do with the slack that's going on. So let's get these screws out. Okay. And there's a little set screw in this brake release lever here. It has to come out because this yellow thing has to come off for the thing to come apart. Those are not exactly tight as well. Okay, now this can slide off of here. And our plastic cover will kind of slide over and then slide off that lever. There's sort of a little rubber thing that it's an attempt at a weather seal, but not very good. Now let's see if this side was like the other. Okay, so this one's a little bit tighter. On the other side, this torque screw right here wasn't tight all the way, and it was allowing this lever to move independently. But there's 3 screws underneath here that attach to this plate that hold the entire mechanism on. So we're going to have to pull this mechanism off of the motor and then check the tension on those. Now these have a bunch of thread locker on them, which is super important because if these back out, the parking brake on your chair isn't going to work. Okay, so this thing comes off of here, like so, and then on the other chair, these 3 screws were loose, which is going to result in this plate, when it's attached to the chair, not being firmly attached to the brake mechanism because it rattles on here. So let's check our tension on these. See, I would have thought that these motors were assembled by someone else, but maybe not. Okay, well, I'm not going to be able to tighten that one up because it's stripped. Hopefully it's yeah, hopefully it's tight enough, but that's all we're going to get out of it. So I was able to get a little bit of movement on each one of those, so at least those are tight now. Oh, look at this. Okay, so this motor is actually a little bit different than the one on the other side. This right here is what a lot of our noise is coming from. That's interesting. So on the other motor, I don't know if you can see this. Let me break in here for a second. I'm editing this section, and because the video is in 2 different halves, this didn't get mentioned. Quantum, or the DME, or whoever, well, Quantum ships the DME the motors to install. They use 2 different revisions of the motors on the chair. They're different. I went back later and checked. The model numbers on the brakes are different. The model numbers on the motors are different. They look the same from the outside, but when you build power chairs, you have to use matched sets of motors. Both of them need to be the same and as close to the same build date as possible. Just to normal manufacturing tolerances. If you build a motor, say, today, and then you use the one on the other side from a batch that was like 2 years old, they're going to be different. They're going to respond differently. Electrically, they're going to be a little bit different. That's just how manufacturing is. Now, that's assuming, in my opinion, that the manufacturing is being done correctly and has proper checkpoints. So when things are produced, they go through a quality control check. They pull out samples every so often and make sure they're meeting the original specs. So they have the spec sheet and they say, okay, this is what they need to be. And as time and years go on and they're manufacturing parts, examples from each of those batches are pulled out and compared to the original designs and QC checks and words. I'm so annoyed that I can't even talk right now. It's been over a year and I'm looking through this footage and I'm just like, what? To explain the difference in these brake mechanisms, or specifically the couplers used between the motor and the brake unit itself, the one I just took apart is totally different than the one on the other side. The one on the other side is a proper application in my opinion and kind of conforms to standard engineering ideals when it's put together. There's a shaft that comes out. It's got a sort of a flat spot on it. The nut or the coupler slides on there and there's a set screw that is driven down through the side of that nut to affix it permanently. So there is exactly zero movement between that motor shaft and that coupler. Well, not only that, the quality of the metal used on the other side is far superior. It's sort of that yellow grade 8 looking stuff that, you know, some expensive strong bolts have. This side, it's made of pot metal or something like that. The little nut coupler thing is halfway hollowed out, and for some reason they machined a groove around the fastening surface where you would put a wrench, for example, if it was a normal nut, and stuck an O-ring in there. And then not only that, it slides onto the same style of shaft with a flat spot on it, but there's no set screw. It's held in place with a circlip, which the other side doesn't, which circlips are fine when combined with a set screw. But it's just slid on there, it's mismatched, it's got, you know, several hundred thousandths of play in it, and it's just sitting there rattling. And it looks like they knew that. That's why they machined that groove and put an O-ring in there to try and mitigate some of the noise it's making. But there's extreme loads on this. This is an electric motor that's going through a gearbox and driving a 430-pound chair that's upwards of 700 pounds with someone sitting in it. I mean, depending on the model and the size of the person. Why would you put ill-fitting parts on there that rattle around? And not only that, it's the parking brake. So as you're sitting here moving like this, or riding in a vehicle, or stopping on a hill, that little pot metal part, because it doesn't fit correctly, sits there and rattles. Now, if you know anything about pot metal, or metal-centered whatever, that stuff cracks. It's brittle. Anyways, I don't get it. Anyways, I wanted to break in and say that. By the way, this was the fifth set of motors my chair had on it. So I'm envisioning in some warehouse somewhere, there's just a mountain of motors. They don't know where they came from. Sometimes they throw used ones in there, in my opinion. Just joking, paraphrasing here. Sometimes there's used ones in there, sometimes there's new ones. Sometimes there's motors from completely different chairs, and they just pull stuff off the bottom of the pile. I have no words. How do you be proud of this type of equipment? Here's a question in the comments down below. I know we're getting off into the weeds here. Do you know of anyone with one of these newer style quantum chairs, and by newer I mean in the last like 3 years or so, you can tell because they have brown colored motors and like maybe better suspension. Do you know of anyone that's had one of these chairs that loves it to death and it's been reliable? I'm not being facetious, I want to know. Are there examples of these chairs out there, whether it's the Edge 3 or the Edge 2 or the Forefront or the HD ones, although I think the HD ones use different motors. I want to know, honestly, do you know of anyone that loves the chair and hasn't had any issues with it? Now, granted, people are only going to say, typically, they're only going to get online or call for help or put in work orders if something's broken, so you may not hear from people that are having a positive experience, but I have not encountered any of that. A lot of people contact me and ask me questions about things, and anytime someone talks about one of these chairs, they're like, oh yeah, I'm on my third set of motors. And it's like not even a year old. Anyways, back to the video. a slot is machined all the way around this nut, and they've got sort of a O-ring in there. And it's a little bit smaller too, but this one just rattles all over the place. Now that may not look like much movement, but when you combine it with the gear ratio and the diameter of these tires, this little bit of movement right here is huge when it comes to final drive. But that's our noise right there, and that's where most of our movement's coming from. There's not much I can do to fix that. This is just keyed in there and held in with a circlip. The one on the other side was different. Huh. Well, at least the bolts on this side weren't nearly as stripped out, aside from that one, and most everything over here was tight. So that's good. And we don't have a broken bolt here. But that's gonna bug me now. Well, I don't think there's much I can do about that. Anyways, I'm gonna keep going through this thing, check the rest of the stuff, and yeah. I went and looked through my video footage from my phone from the other side. So the way that nut attaches on the other side, well, first off, it's solid metal. It's not a lightweight thing that just slides over a shaft. If you notice with this one here, see how it's all hollowed out on the inside, like they're trying to save weight or something, or make it fit in a space that it's not supposed to? Like, all that material's taken out of there. And this is like sort of a pot metal. The one on the other side was steel. And the other one still had this similar shaft with one flat side on it. Actually here. There we go. You can see the flat side there. But it had a hole cross drilled in it, and there was a set screw that holds it in place, so you don't get any of that movement. Now, you may think, who cares about the noise? That's annoying. Okay, so this much movement here, whatever this is made out of versus that shaft is going to start wearing. Anytime you have ill-fitting parts like this, as you run around and stop and move and your brakes turn on and off, that's going to keep wearing, it's going to keep smashing together, and these are going to wear out. And this is going to get worse and worse very quickly as time goes on. I can't believe they, well, okay, I can totally believe they would use two different designs or two different motors. But now that I've seen this, I don't know how I go about talking to them and saying, hey, look, I took it completely apart. Okay, so they never replace brake mechanisms. If there's something wrong, they replace the entire thing as a set. So no DME ever that I've heard of is going to be taking these apart. Maybe if you're in some other country where they actually do repair things, but I don't think I can go in and say, hey, there's two different motors. This one part that's completely buried in there that you have to go totally tear it down to get to is messed up. Because they're going to say, well, you took it apart. Okay, so I think I'm going to get out my calipers. I'm going to take measurements of this, take a bunch of pictures, and then I should be able to buy one of these nuts somewhere that I can thread on here and fix it myself. Because, again, there's no way I can go in and say, hey, you need to fix this. Because I'm pretty sure even Quantum doesn't know that these are in there. They probably order them from whatever manufacturer, and they don't take them apart, I would assume. And they wouldn't even have a way of knowing. I'm going to check the model numbers on the motors just to see if there's a difference, but little changes, incremental changes like that. This might be a slightly older one, and it might have been superseded by a newer one, which is on the other side. I didn't get to keep the old motors, so I don't know. This is the problem, though. This is why it moves when it stopped. I wonder if the DME still has the old motors. I'm going to have to tread really lightly here. The main guy I deal with is out of town right now till next week. I might see if I can talk to him, and because he's got a few of these motors laying around in their shop last time I was there. And maybe I can get him to take one apart. Because last time I was there, I got him to remove this cover and take a look under there. So he might be willing to do this. I don't know. We'll see. But it would be nice if I had the old motors, or I don't even know if the old ones were the same or not. But it would be cool if I could just go in there and rip one of these things off and you know, they just let me swap it out or whatever, just that little part. Because within 100 miles, I can guarantee you that's going to be completely toasted. And that concludes looking at one side of this chair. Let's go ahead and jump back in time now. The first part I filmed with my cell phone, and there was a little bit more of initial reactions. In this half you just watched, I had already seen the problems and I was comparing the two sides. So let's jump back. There's going to be a little bit of repeating for some of the stuff I'm saying, but I want to include all this so that you can see the differences between the two sides. And there's also a few more problems on the other side that didn't necessarily show up on what you've already seen. So anyways, short intermission, go grab some coffee. I guess I should probably top it off, but anyways, let's take a look at the other side of the chair. And remember, this is what I took apart first. So initial reactions from me.
It's intermission time, folks, so hurry, hurry, hurry. Step right over to our refreshment center for the most extravagant array of refreshments.
Okay, so here's the forefront. I pulled off the motor assembly, and luckily when they were talking about the bolts being stripped out, they just went ahead and put the boogered up ones back on there. This is like one of the most common bolts on any power chair that exists, but they just went ahead and put it back on. I think I identified some of the noises the suspension's making on this. If you see here, we're missing some bushings on the shocks. They've got the built-in ones here, and this pin right here slides through, and this is where the end of this shock absorber mounts, is right here. But the thing can wobble back and forth a little bit. So as you're moving around and this shock moves, you get back and forth sounds. So what I'm gonna do, I've got some poly spacers out in the garage. I'm gonna get a couple of those and put them in here when I reassemble this and put this assembly back together. But check out the brake mechanism. Remember how I said that I feel like a lot of the issues with the motor slack was these brakes? Well, the motor itself is pretty much fine. That's a pretty acceptable amount of play. It's probably a little more. I'm gonna pull this off of here and check the keyway in there and make sure it's the way it should be. But check this out. Here we have the brake lever in the back. See how this screw is not turning, but the lever is? And as this moves, there's a little micro switch back here. And when you hit a bump, this thing can flop around and trigger that micro switch, which will make the chair stop. So I'm finding a lot of interesting things. Oh, also, this bolt right here that holds the motor assembly is held on with this metal plate. We've got two bolts that thread through, and there's two more here, but they're just welded. And then on this side, we've got these little tiny 10mm nuts. Of course, there's no washers on there. These all have skid marks on them from wrenches slipping. Turns out this one here, the bolt is broken inside there somewhere. If you put a wrench on that and turn it either direction, it just spins. So we've got 3 of the 4 bolts holding it on. So yeah, I don't know. The deeper I go in here, the more I find things that are just like, wow. But I'm gonna pull this lever off. It looks like they tried to use some Loctite or something on there, but I'm gonna go grab my star wrenches and I can guarantee you that there is no tension on this. I'm gonna keep digging in here. I'm gonna pull this brake off, and then we're gonna pull this hub off. And yeah, that doesn't look like much, but when you get the wheels on there, that's gonna translate into a good 1/4 inch of movement with the diameter of the wheels. And this being a brand new motor, there shouldn't be play like that. Anyways, I'm gonna keep digging into this and we'll see what we find. Sorry, I'm filming with my phone. I took the chair apart and my camera's in the other room. I do have the C300 over here, but I don't feel like crawling back into that. Okay, so we've got our star bit on here. Let's see how tight this is. I'm gonna use 2 fingers. Oh my gosh. Of course. Not even tight. Did I catch that on camera? I think that was a hole-in-one. Wow. Oh, also, these bolts that hold the end cap on the plastic motor, one of them is bent already. Yeah, I don't. Let's just say we know for a fact that a lot of crummy parts were used. It was assembled in a hurry. And me just talking about what I'm seeing is translating into complaining. Okay, so it turns out this bracket here was a little bit, well, it wasn't clearanced properly. So all we had to do was shorten up this gap a little bit. And now our shock mount fits in there perfectly. There's no slop in either direction. It rides on the bushings like it's supposed to. And yeah, that was an easy fix. Now on the back side here, where the shock mounts, it goes in here like this. And they're using this pin, which is designed to have a retaining clip on the back side. But all they're doing, you shove this thing in this hole, and then this cover with that dimple is supposed to go in here like this and push up against that and hold it in place. But if we look at this, there's 0 wear marks on there whatsoever. And same with the back of this thing. So I think we just need to add a little poly washer spacer in here to keep that pressed in. And then I'm gonna have to add a bushing up here as well. But they're using the same thing here. This thing slides in. It's supposed to have a retaining clip back here, but they don't use one. I mean, I guess this is an okay solution. It goes on like that and clamps on, which holds it in place. But I would have liked to see some sort of bushing or something back here. I don't know, maybe I'm being picky, but anyways, for now, this thing fits in here like it should now. And we don't have any play. Yeah. All right, I've gotten the bolts off our brake mechanism here, which I might add, this thing is grossly undersized for its application. But let's check these little screws here that are holding the brake mechanism onto the motor. What do you want to bet they're not very tight? Ah, called it. Yeah, these aren't even tight. So what happens here, this whole thing sits on the motor and is held in with 4 of these little screws. And this whole thing, if you see this hexagonal pattern here, that's the brake material. It clamps on a giant spring and goes up against this nut here and keeps the motor from turning. So if these screws are loose, this whole thing will slide around on this plate, which is bolted to this motor, thus giving you a whole bunch of slack. See, if I turn the motor here, you'll see that nut turning. See? Anyways, the only thing stopping you from moving is this little black piece of like sort of clutch plastic poly material that's clamped inside this giant spring here. So yeah, if this is loose, chair's not going to stop. We're gonna have as much slop as there is with these screws, and the gap between the fitment of this and this. And that's all exponentially magnified. Well, actually, exponential is not the right word, but it's very linearly amplified by small movement here equals large movement here, which equals even larger movement when the tire is attached. Now, these screws are so tiny that they may not even be able to provide enough clamping load to keep everything from moving. Again, really tiny parts. If you look at other chairs, these are massive. Actually, this C300 right here. So here's our drive motor, here's our brake. See how it's the same diameter? This brake mechanism is huge. You need as much space as possible, and it needs to be bolted directly to the motor. You can see the screws or bolts that hold this on go all the way through and directly into the motor. there's no intermediary plate to provide more points of connection and more points of potential movement. Speaks for itself. Okay, we've got our bolts back in. One of them is bent. I don't even know how that happens. This is a plastic cover, but check it out. Now we've got a much more decisive click. And there's no rattling. When you're hearing like the pinging metal noises, that means things are loose. So yeah, now this thing is working like it was supposed to. Which, by the way, there's no weather seals or O-rings in here. And where this sits, all of the spray and water and gunk from the tire gets blasted right onto this part of the motor. We do have a little rubber thing here, but by no means is that waterproof in any way. But yeah, listen to the sound. It's so much better. So much more decisive. Okay, let's keep going. Got this part done. Got the shock part sorted. I think that shock will kind of center itself. I'm not going to worry about putting bushings in here. I will put in a spacer just to hold this pin in place and keep it from rattling around. But let's pull this hub off of here now and take a look at the keyway. Actually, now that I'm looking at it, the input shaft is actually moving as I move this. Well, I'm just going to check our tension on this and make sure it's good, but I don't think that play is coming from our keyway. Okay, I just checked this bolt. They did manage to get one thing tight. So the tension on this is fine. It was torqued out, no problem. So we're going to put this thing back together, and I haven't touched the other side yet. Again, both these motors are brand new, and we're going to see if we get a difference in play from one side to the other, and also different noises and things that they make. Okay, we've got the shock put back in here. I think I'm gonna change my mind on this. We've still got a pretty good amount of back and forth play here. I can take this cap off and fix this easily later on. So I'm gonna put the rest of it back together. We don't have any more play up here, but we do still have quite a bit here. So let's check these bolts here and see if they're tight. I'm kind of looking at this and you can see how that's sort of sticking out? These are supposed to be a countersunk thing here. And kind of looks like a lot to me. It's not in there very good. So, oh, what do you know? No wonder this thing has camber. Wow. Okay, so I've already tightened at a turn. More loose bolts. I got almost a full turn out of both of these. And when I feel back here, there's another set of them on the other side of this bracket. So I think I'm gonna take this back off and check those bolts on the other side, because that's what the whole motor assembly is attached to. And with these being countersunk, if they're loose, there's gonna be a lot of load on those surfaces, especially with a 430 pound chair, which is what this weighs without me in it. So yeah, I don't think they probably would have removed these when they changed the motors the other day. I think they only had to remove these, the shock, and these 4 bolts here, which this one, again, is broken. But this one shouldn't affect the camber. That's only holding the rotational mass of the motor. So when you say 3 out of 4 ain't bad, in this case, I can work with that. It'd be nice not to have parts broken on a new chair, but yeah, so I'm gonna rip this thing back off here, and we're gonna check those bolts on the other side. All right, boys, place your bets now. That's rounded out. Okay, that one's fairly tight. It still had some movement though, but both of these are rounded out. Are really messed up. Yeah. So I'm getting ready to put the tire back on, and I notice this little plastic cover is sticking up right here, and there's a little white piece of something in there. So I started digging around and I found this thing. And if you look real close, see how that's a 3? Like the backing off of 3M tape. there's little pieces of tape under here. And on this one, they didn't even peel off the backing all the way. So now this is on there. Good to know it's attached with foam tape, but interesting that whoever couldn't be bothered to even peel that off. The mind boggles. Okay, she's all back together and sitting on the floor now. We're still gonna get some front to back motion. I haven't touched the other side of it yet, but mainly what I'm concerned with is the noise it's gonna make. So let's test it. Ha! It's only coming from the other side. This side is almost silent. See if you can tell the difference between this noise here. Listen carefully. It's actually kind of drowned out by the other side. As opposed to this. Hear that? Let's look at the other side. We're getting a little bit, but that's just a little bit of slop that's in that system, as opposed to this, where it's slop plus everything loose. Yeah. They're doing great work over in Vegas. Oh, I sound like such a troll, but it's the truth. This is one of those cases where it's even more frustrating to understand how these things work and take them apart and see what's actually going on, because it puts you in this place where everyone's going to be mad at you for multiple reasons for even finding that this is the problem. So anyways, I'm gonna grab my calipers, get a bunch of measurements, take some pictures of it, draw up what it's supposed to look like, and I guess I'll just see what happens. I'm gonna put it back together for now. The rest of the bolts are all tight, and there is one thing with the shock absorber on the front I'll have to modify, but really interesting. Oh, I'm noticing now too, this bolt that holds the rear shock absorber on, or the pin, this thing is different on this side than it is on the other. Interesting. That's the only thing I can come up with to say. Again, I'm rendered speechless. Interesting is the only comment I have. I think that just about sums it up. That was my experience. Now, don't go asking me in the comments, hey Dan, should I buy a Quantum? I don't know. Do whatever you want. I can't answer that question, because that's when I get sued. Well, I might be being a little bit over dramatic here, but I will say this: Quantum, Pride, whatever you call yourselves, if you've made it this far into the video, what are you doing? I'm not implying anything. I'm just asking you a question. What are you doing? How did I end up with a chair like this? Granted, there's probably some shared blame, as it were, between the DME and maybe the manufacturing, but what's up? Explain. I'm curious. We're gonna leave it there. This video is about 48 minutes long at this point. Thanks for sticking around and watching the whole thing. Feel free to watch this over and over again. It is what it is. I can't stand that statement, but I don't know what else to say. Have a good one. I'll catch you next time. I don't get the idea that the forefront was long for this world.